Chapter 3. The Open Polar Sea. The fair breeze blew, the white foam flew, the furrow followed free. We were the first that ever burst into that silent sea. Ancient Mariner. In a few days the propeller was repaired, the axle pins and one of the blades only being broken. We left the cove, sailed eastwardly many miles along the barrier, and entered a broad bay stretching to the south, comparatively clear of ice. After a run of 60 miles, we reached a great glacier stretching across it from shore to shore, connecting the slopes of two opposite mountains about 20 miles apart. We got out 2 boats, manned with 6 men each, pushed our way through the pack, reached the foot of the glacier, moored up, and began the difficult ascent. After a journey of 10 miles, we reached its summit, over 2,000 feet high. The view was magnificent. Measureless ice fields stretched on either hand, and mountain ranges whose snow-clad peaks glittered under bright sun like polished marble. Directly in front stretched a boundless expanse of waters, till they were lost in the far distant southern horizon. It is impossible to express our delight as we gazed on this Antarctic polar sea, and we broke into loud huzzas. After a short rest, we retraced our way back to the ship and announced the great discovery. "Lieutenant Hamilton," the captain, whose arm had been injured by a falling spar, "you will don your uniform and take possession of that open sea in the name of our country. Plant the stars and stripes there, and long may they wave." Among the ship's crew was a young fellow about 25, a native of New Zealand, whom the captain had picked up as a boy on one of his voyages to that island. He was a grandson of a distinguished Ragatira, or king of the brave, warlike, once powerful Manoa Tihoka tribe, now reduced by disastrous wars against other tribes to a few hundred souls. He was of medium stature, his frame well knit, active and supple as a leopard, and possessed extraordinary muscular strength. His skin was a rich olive brown color, his well-shaped head clothed with glossy black curling hair, his fine-cut nostrils, splendid teeth, winsome dark eyes, open and happy expression of countenance, combined to produce as handsome and engaging a specimen of the South Sea Islander as one would find in any tribe. According to the custom of his country, he was tattooed on the breast and arms with New Zealand mythological figures, and on his cheek a pair of little sunfishes with the tails meeting at the chin. This was the insignia of his rank as Prince of Royal New Zealand blood. He was an excellent sailor, uncommonly bright and intelligent, an expert hand at many things. A devout Christian, he unconsciously mingled his faith with some of the superstitions of his race, belief in fairies, witches, and demons. His disposition was affectionate, and he was devotedly attached to me. He had been christened John, and was very popular with the officers and crew, who had dubbed him the title of corporal. As sailors not unfrequently have their pets on board ship, parrots, owls, monkeys, cats, etc., John had his particular ornithological favorite in the person of a tame raven, a splendid specimen of the corvine tribe, with jet-black beak and legs, black glossy plumage tinged with green. Like the generality of his tribe, this fellow was pugnacious, fearless, thievish, a terrible fighter, cunning as a fox, highly intelligent. His colloquial abilities were wonderful, surpassing the most wonderful accomplished parrot. He could outswear any pirate that ever roamed the seas. His name was Jack, to which John had prefixed the title of Commodore, and Commodore Jack was the especial pet and at the same time terror of the whole ship. He and John, like Dickens' Barnaby Rudge and Grip, were inseparable. He was jealous as Othello, and woe betide any unlucky cat, owl, monkey that came within reach of his powerful claws and beak. His style of business was like his conversation, brief, always to the point, and he never spared expletives. He addressed his master as Corp and myself as Cap. Both are introduced here as having their necessary, though perhaps humble, role to play among the dramatis personae of this narrative. The next morning, our crew got out the boats provided with the necessary articles for the trip: canned food, arms, nautical instruments, one of the ship's flags, and my naval uniform to do honor in the ceremony. Also a few cans of gunpowder and sticks of dynamite to try some experiments in blowing up ice. Our first mate, David Roberts, took command, and accompanied by John and the Raven, perched firmly on his master's shoulder, we embarked, pushing through the pack, reached the glacier, mounted the boats on the sledges, dragged them with much labor up to the summit, then descended the opposite slope, and night coming on, pitched our tent, took supper, wrapped ourselves in our blankets, and went to sleep. Next morning we re-embarked, rowed several miles along the shore, which was skirted with ice, till we reached a long, narrow strip of land projecting out into the sea. Its shores consisted of rugged precipices, rendering it impossible to land. It was flanked by a large iceberg. We moored our ship alongside, climbed the steep slope, and reached the summit, which commanded an extensive view of the open polar sea, over which numerous bergs and floes were floating towards the south. I planted the flag on the highest part of the berg, and the star-spangled banner waved over the South Polar Ocean. I made a short speech in honor of the event. We fired a salute from our carbines and revolvers, then began the descent by a shorter route. It was difficult and dangerous. Our shipmate David lost his footing and fell into one of the deep crevasses of the berg, from which he was rescued with great difficulty. His lower limbs were broken, besides severe injuries in other parts of his body. It was impossible to convey him to the ship in either one of the boats. I ordered the crew to go back in one as quickly as possible and return with larger boats and the ship's surgeon. They departed and rowed swiftly over the waters. John and I bound up poor David's limbs as well as we could with splinters of wood and pieces of rope, and patiently awaited the return of the crew till night, during which our wounded shipmate suffered extreme pain. The next day and night passed with no sign of the boats. John, whose eye was as keen as an eagle's, often climbed the berg and scanned the horizon. The weather now changed, announcing a coming storm. In the face of the berg, about 20 feet above the water, was a large cavern which had been hollowed out by the waves. With great difficulty, we raised David from the boat, drew him up into the cavern, and made him as comfortable as possible. We drew up most of our boat gear, foods, blankets, arms, instruments, etc. The Raven perched himself silently in a corner of the cave. We partly closed the entrance with blocks of ice to screen off the wind. I was filled with torturing anxiety in view of our deplorable situation, and feared that the crew on their passage to or return from the ship had been lost in the ice drift. During the day a heavy gale sprang up from the northeast, and it grew freezing cold. The bergs and floes were heaving and tossing in all directions over the sea. By nightfall the storm increased in violence, and the waves, dashing high up against the face of the berg, forced streams of water into the cavern. Worn out with fatigue and anxiety, we sank to sleep in spite of the uproar. Suddenly a loud and appalling sound aroused us. We hurried to the portal. A fierce gale shrieked through the cavern. Beneath us rolled a tumultuous ocean of billows and ice masses as the black storm clouds flew across the sky. The fitful light of the moon disclosed to our terrified gaze an immense iceberg bearing down upon us. For a moment its dark shadow loomed over us, then its mighty wall, crushing our boat to atoms, dashed down upon the cavern's mouth like thunder. The shock hurled us back onto the floor. It was dark as midnight. The air grew thick. The roar of the tempest was heard no more. The bergs were frozen together, and we were buried alive in an icy tomb.